All right. All right. So I guess that means we're official, guys. So I'll untie us from the dock here, and when people file in, um, they'll catch up as we go. So, welcome everyone to C3's first online technology event, specifically focused towards freight and logistics. My name is Drew Close, and I'm a consultant with C3 Tech Advisors, and I work with IT leaders and business leaders in the freight and logistics space, specifically to bring process clarity to technology decision making. So I'm going to be your host today, and I've got a few guests that I want to introduce. But before that, I want to thank our guests in the audience. You're making time out of your day, and we appreciate that. So we got a few people tuning in from different organizations, and in the registration we saw we've got some 3PLs, we've got some parcel carriers, a couple port operators, and then brokerages, and really some software, everyone in between. So a good mix of people. So hopefully this is edifying to you, and it helps you in your strategy as you defend your business against fraud and ransomware. So that's the goal for today, is to educate you and to look to some of your peers for some information and kind of some help in developing that strategy. So in no particular order, I'd like to introduce each of our panelists and take a minute to give us your name. Just introduce yourself and a little bit about your background, how you're involved in freight and logistics, and that'll get our audience up to speed on who's talking to them today. So Chris, why don't we start with you?
Sure. I'm Chris Arthur, Director of IT Infrastructure and Security at Seco Logistics, global logistics company. I've been there roughly around 3 years, and I've been doing logistics and IT for about 5 years, and in IT industry for, I just counted 28 years as of today. So.
Excellent. Well, appreciate you jumping in on the conversation today. So glad to have you with us. Remy, why don't you go next if you would?
I'm Remy Springer. I currently serve as the Cybersecurity Program Manager at CR England and co-founder of Trident Stack Cybersecurity. I specialize in joining companies after massive cyber attacks and architecting and implementing a comprehensive security program to prevent future breaches. I have my Network Plus, Security Plus, CFCE, ECE, CISSP, MCSE, among a few other certifications and years of experience.
Awesome. Thanks for joining us today, Remy. Glad to have you. Rob, why don't you give us a little bit of background about who you are and where you're from?
Yeah, thanks, Drew. My name is Rob Hanlon. I've been a CIO for over 20 years in manufacturing distribution areas, primarily U.S. or say North American based. And my kind of approach or scope has been more of a customer of all of you, but also as someone who is accountable to the board for the cyber capabilities of the corporation in a publicly traded corporation. Thank you.
Awesome. Rob, appreciate you being here and bringing your experience, adding to the conversation. So thank you. Eric, why don't you tell us just a little bit about who you are and where you're coming from?
Sure. My name is Eric Avigdor. I'm based in Austin. I spent nearly the past 25 years in tech, most of those in cybersecurity, mainly building products. I run product management for Votiro, a cybersecurity company in the content security space. Most of the past 2 decades I've spent in identity and access management, and in malware and data protection, and happy to be here.
Awesome. Well, appreciate you bringing your experience, and it's follow-up conversation. We'll talk about the excuse me, the musical instruments in your background. That's definitely interesting to me. So appreciate you being on today. So we'll get started. I've got some questions for our panel we'll walk through, but there's so much that we can talk about in the cybersecurity arena. We're specifically zeroing in on fraud and ransomware protection and putting together a strategy to guard against that. And the world has changed dramatically over the past 10 years, and so have the tools and the approach to it. And if you guys have been in this industry for a long time, and you remember, like, you used to have firewalls and antivirus, and if you had up-to-date, antivirus signatures, UTM appliance at the edge, and network access control, you're pretty much in good shape. Like, that's where we started from, but it has evolved quite a bit. And we've got executive listeners on the line, and then we also have some operations folks and also some cybersecurity folks. So I want to give our executive listeners a sense of how that threat landscape has changed over the past, period of, 5-10 years, and how frequently new tools are coming to market and how you have to evaluate those. Eric, you've been on the product side for a while and you've seen kind of the evolution there. Talk about that for just a minute.
Yeah, so I think the way I look at this is if I think 10 years back, 20 years back, the evolution of threats and threat types were very slow. Truly new types of attack were very infrequent. And because of that, you mentioned obviously keeping your AV up to date, your antivirus, your sandbox. It was a fairly easy task. You update your AV, it detects new known signatures of new malicious content, and it would block that. The world has completely changed in the past 3-4 years. You see new zero-day attacks, new malware variants, ransomware variants coming out every single day. We see hundreds of new variants every single day, which are easily passing through your antivirus and your sandbox because those are not designed to detect everything that they don't know. So the first point is, I think, the introduction of AI into the malware space. Now, new malware can be created very quickly. One challenge we have is how do we adjust to that? But a whole other aspect is the fact that data is just now everywhere. Files, for example, are everywhere.
And I want to double click on something you said here is that the threat landscape is changing a little bit. And there's two concepts that that are being deployed that weren't even around, 5 and 10 years ago. And this is zero trust and microsegmentation. And some of us understand, what zero trust and microseg. But Remy, I want you to talk about this. This is near and dear to your heart. Talk a little bit about why these two elements are so important in defending against fraud and ransomware.
Of course. Microsegmentation and zero trust network access are preventative and impact reducing controls. On the preventative side, these controls lock out inbound connections on everything except what you've explicitly allowed. And in the event the other controls fail, they limit the damage to just one device. In my opinion, these products can make the difference between a breach putting a company under overnight from tremendous damages and a minor breach affecting one user and one host for a day before it's analyzed, reimaged, and put back to production clean.
So the challenge is not every organization is using microsegmentation or using zero trust because it takes a while to get there. It's worth it to pursue that. And I would just encourage everyone, if you don't have a strategy for those, that, gosh, you've got to get on that road. So appreciate the definition on that. One of the things that we deal with is, the passing of documents and, like you mentioned, moving east-west within the organization. In the freight and logistics world, probably in other verticals as well, there's a lot of document exchange. And I think of quotes being exchanged or PODs or certificate of insurance, maybe safety data sheets, There's waybills, there's packing lists, there's all kinds of stuff that we share as documents in between organizations. And I don't think we're ever going to get away from that. And Deloitte did a study, take it for what it's worth, okay? The minute that numbers are published are probably out of date. But they said that 91% of all phishing attacks come through your email. Chris, you've been at this for 20 plus years. How real is that threat? And on a global scale, like how difficult is that to manage?
Yeah, we still see quite a few email attacks, obviously coming through phishing, and I do think it is challenging, right? And I think the threats are changing as well because I think AI is making it a little bit easier to generate like well-crafted emails that are trickier for end users and for users to, oh, this looks real, so they're going to go ahead and click on it, right? So I think one of the things that I think hopefully we'll see is traditional email security vendors up their game, raise the bar a little bit, and start looking at more behavioral based email, telemetry to basically protect companies better versus the traditional, like, hey, this is kind of like spam or this is traditional signature based. So I think you'll start to see that area evolve, but we do see plenty of it.
Yeah, and there's a lot of cases where fraud was perpetrated because the email looks so legit. it's somebody that is spoofed within the organization that says, hey, please approve this invoice, or please authorize this movement of either goods or services or whatnot. And it's a negative impact to the company. So getting sharper about the telemetry, I think, is absolutely something that we need to zero in on. And as we do that, we look at the impact to not only the organization, but the concentric rings. Who are you connected to? And I saw a quote yesterday that I want to read to you guys, is that the supply chain is like the bloodstream of the global economy. And I love this analogy. So it's the supply chain is the bloodstream of the global economy. When it flows freely, life thrives. And when it's blocked, the world feels pain. So fraud and ransomware have significant impacts on the business that it's targeting, but also then those concentric rings, the companies that are tied in that supply chain are impacted as well. And Rob, you come from a background that you're relying on partnerships in a just-in-time kind of a movement of goods. Talk to me about that impact on the supply chain. If where you're at, you get impacted, kind of those concentric rings. Tell me about that experience and what you think there.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I mean, we all understand the connectedness of the supply chain, and the weakest link is the strength of the supply chain, right? It's the barometer. So it really is fundamentally based on trust, and are your partners doing what they say they're doing? Because if you look at, or if I think about risk or cost of an outage, it's not just operational cost to my business. It's not just the operational cost to my partners who are connected to me. It's also the reputational cost of, can you be trusted, right? And if you're not trusted, your business is going to erode. You're going to see margins erode. You're going to see capacity erode. And I think that's the thing to keep the eye on. It's not a light switch. Light switch is the cost of operations. I think the erosion is your reputational erosion in the network. But fundamentally, if you are someone who touches a retailer, it's over, because we are judged by the service levels we provide. And if we can't hit those service levels, and we have a reputation for not hitting those service levels, one, you're punished immediately. Immediately, you lose capacity. The retailers are punitive, and they're trying to protect their business. But secondly, it could take you a month to lose it. It'll take you 2 to 3 years to get it back. And so that reputational risk is really the thing to focus on when you're talking about the risk to the supply chain.
Yeah, and so much of that logistics, and you guys would know better than I, but the grading that the company receives based on being a carrier and moving goods for somebody else, that impact is felt for a long time. Like you said, Rob, to build that back over time is really difficult. So the concentric rings in the supply chain absolutely are felt. When businesses invest in technology, and we think of like the assets or the tooling that help make money, companies look at the amount that's spent, and they expect to see an ROI. Is this going to help us make money or save money? And then there's the mitigate risk. So when businesses invest in that, and Rob, I'm going to ask you on this, because I know that you served as kind of that conduit between boards and the technical side. How do you bridge the gap between the business here? How do you justify or show an ROI on cybersecurity investments?
Yeah, at a high level, the way you frame it is what we talked about previously, this reputational risk, and you can actually calculate operational costs of being out. I can't ship. How much am I losing a day? What have you? And you can frame or put an order of magnitude against reputational risk that causes a sense of awareness and almost a sense of urgency. We have to do something, but justifying an actual dollar amount is a lot harder, right? It's you have to execute a business. You got to hit a plan. Shareholders have expectations. And so what I would do is I would find the partners in the corporation to work with me. I'd work with the chief supply chain officer. I would work with our head of audit and risk and compliance, and together, and actually I'd work with our external partners, our audit partner, as well as our compliance partner. And we would talk about what's going on in the space. What are our peers? What's our peer set doing? What do our customers expect? and where are our controls, and do we have confidence in those controls? It's much more a business conversation about risk and risk management than it is about the technology of itself. And that starts to develop an awareness. It starts to develop momentum, and it's not just a one-time investment. It is a strategic investment over multiple years, because it's not just on and off. It is ongoing capabilities and getting more mature as your attackers get more mature, right? And so it's that relationship that was important in justifying investment.
So you really have to build some fans internally and also get people, you have to raise their acumen on the risk that you're trying to mitigate around with the strategy and the framework that you're putting in place. It's not just, hey, we need to buy this because it's going to do this. It's a component, and you've got to get people involved in that strategy as well, it sounds like.
One other item I'd say is your boards are being inundated with content and messaging around the cost of outages in cybersecurity. It's not like it's not top of mind. It is definitely top of mind. Being able to connect with them on their terms about that is the key part. So that connection and relationship is very important to the board.
Good stuff. Appreciate that, Rob. So let's talk about the priorities. In the freight and logistics world, we see a rebalancing. Right now, we're seeing a rebalancing of capacity and demand, which is good for profits in the long run. But until we get there, IT budgets are shrunk, and probably, we're asked to do more with less. And it's a little bit cliche, but that directive, how do you prioritize the IT spend and cybersecurity spend, and where does this fit in the equation? So, Remy, would you take a swing at this one?
Sure. I always recommend to my companies that they stop thinking of cybersecurity as an IT expense. Here's why. IT expenses allow you to make your company more productive. A super simple example of this would be your internet. If you're still using dial-up for some reason, you lose dramatic productivity from all of your workers in the office because the internet is nearly unusable for them and they have to listen to that horrible sound. At CR England, we have a massive development team that's building custom software for better route planning for trucks, tracking for our trailers, internal communication. And we spend this money because it already has and will continue to make CR England more profitable by minimizing mistakes and inefficiency. In contrast, cybersecurity tools might reduce the productivity of our business slightly, since security and convenience can sometimes be at the opposite ends of the spectrum. It might be faster to have full administrator on every machine in your organization, so no one has to call help desk, but it's also faster to have no password on your financial accounts to save those few seconds getting signed in. These are obviously terrible ideas. Cybersecurity spending is not about directly boosting productivity. Rather, its aim is to safeguard the integrity, confidentiality, and availability of your company's data and systems. It reduces risk of your efficient solutions disappearing overnight, but it doesn't enhance your productivity on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, you got to strike that balance. Oh, go ahead, Rob.
Yeah, just to add, sorry to interrupt you, Drew. Just to add to that, because I agree. If you say cybersecurity is an IT expense, that totally loses the strategic nature of the spend, right? So what we've done in multiple companies is you have roadmaps. I have a roadmap for every major function. I have a roadmap for supply chain. I have a roadmap for back office. I have a roadmap for manufacturing, and I had a roadmap for security. But I actually characterize it as risk management. And so you get a business leader to sponsor each roadmap and you build it with them. And it's probably a 3-year roadmap. Here are the investments we're going to make along the road, right? And each year, as you get into your annual planning session, you look at where everybody is on the roadmap and what we worked on last year, what we want to work on this year, and there's never enough money. But you get those business owners in a room, those business sponsors in a room, because they own their roadmap, they care about their roadmap. And you get them, what happens is they start horse trading and negotiating. Yeah, that's really important for us as a business. We're going to invest in those areas. And you get a very high functioning leadership team who are actually setting the priorities for you because you spent the time up front to develop those roadmaps. And so my cyber roadmap was actually my chief risk officer, and it was a risk management roadmap. And that's how we did it. So we actually did, to Remy's point, we didn't call it cybersecurity. We called it risk management. And it was a business investment roadmap for risk management. Made a huge difference. All of a sudden, I wasn't defending IT spend business people were advocating for IT investment based on their roadmap and what the capabilities they could deliver.
Wow, good stuff. Yeah, getting those people to champion that roadmap, and it links all business units. That's good stuff. It's great. I've been taught that if there's an elephant in the room, that I should introduce that. And one of the biggest threats, and we're going to talk about it here, one of the biggest threats to every business today, especially in freight and logistics and supply chain, is ransomware. In Q4, we saw a report by SecureWorks, and they suggested that the average dwell time within the business for ransomware had fallen from 4.5 days down to 24 hours. So this means, of course, that once the bad code gets in, rather than sitting in wait for 4.5 days, it's down to 24 hours before it deploys. And then 10% of those instances, the deployment was within 5 hours of gaining access. So I want to spend a little bit of time on ransomware. We talked about, getting people involved and putting a strategy together, but we have to talk about how to defend when this goes badly. So I'm going to give a little bit of background. Big question: where does ransomware come from? How does it get in? And then how do we better defend against this? And Eric, I want you to talk about this because you have significant background in that defense against that. So start us off there, and then we're going to keep moving.
Yeah, so I think I'd like to tie together a few points that just came up. Rob mentioned trust with third parties, and Remy mentioned the fact that, security can't always enhance efficiency. So let's take an example. And you mentioned, earlier, Drew, that 90% of ransomware comes in through email. That's actually changing. That's significantly changing. Bad actors have identified that, we have a whole lot of protection around email. So now we're seeing hacks coming in through Teams or Slack messages. So an attack looks something like this. You get a Teams message from an external contact. Now, psychologically, you trust Teams because it's your own, it's your own internal chat environment. So you click on that attachment, something's deployed. You send it over to your colleague, and the ball rolls, right? And you get breached. A second example is you have a third-party facing portal. Let's say you have a partner portal or a customer portal or a consumer portal. Someone uploads a document. You need to use the document. That document is now quarantined and blocked because it's, you're put at risk. So actually, done correctly with a zero trust approach, if we can get to a point where data is safe, 100% safe to be used or as close as possible, it actually does increase productivity and efficiency. Because if we could allow our users to consume data safely, confident enough that data coming in is not ransomware, that actually introduces the ability to conduct efficient business. Yep.
I don't know about you guys, but I look at everything that comes in, and if I don't immediately recognize the name, it's suspect. And even sometimes when you get documents, I'm thinking twice about double clicking this because we just live in that world, and I don't want to click on links. I don't want to open documents, but it's part of our job. And so what you're talking about is that zero trust that Remy was talking about earlier, is that you go from a reactive to a proactive approach in the guarding against malicious code. I think that's a fundamental change, and there's a lot of businesses that still have to get there because we open stuff and we hope it doesn't go badly. So I want your opinion on this. There's a lot of companies out there that have had incidents, and the ransomware. I've started a list of companies that have gotten hit, specifically in the freight and logistics space, and it's very telling. All four of the big the ocean going freight companies have all been hit. They're big targets. I'm going to come to that later. But towards the end of last year, there were several companies that made the news. I'm not going to name them, but they got hit by ransomware. There was an ELD company, there was a cold chain company, there was an LTL on the East Coast. They all got hit, and they all had to get together, like their leadership had to get together and answer one big question. Do we pay the ransom? So I would like you guys to weigh in on this, and not necessarily, as a what your company does, but your opinion as a cybersecurity professional. Like, in your opinion, should companies pay a ransom if they get hit by ransomware? Chris, what do you think?
Well,
Yeah, I would say I'll start. I think, the easy answer is nobody ever wants to pay, right? Because it just perpetuates the ransom. But I think it honestly, it depends, right? I mean, every company is different. I come from an infrastructure background. I want as much flexibility in a recovery process as possible. And, sometimes your backups may be compromised, right? You may have nothing to restore. That paying that ransomware is the only way of getting your data back or recovering, and that's the survival of your company, right? And so I think in some cases, yes, you may need to pay, right? And even that's not a sure thing, right? But it gives you a better probability of recovering and survivability. There's all sorts of issues with paying the ransomware, don't get me wrong, and there's obviously laws and regulations you have to be extremely careful and potentially run by FBI and things. But I think that overall, I think it really depends on the situation. If you have good recovery options, hey, maybe you don't need to. I think it just depends. And really, the business has to be involved in making that decision. It's not really necessarily an IT decision.
Hmm.
Yeah, I agree completely. On it's a business decision. When we think about our cyber governance at where I came from, first of all, you have an insurance partner. Secondly, you have a law firm, probably another firm who specializes in incident response, right? So as you exercise your incident response plan, which you do need to exercise, part of that exercise needs to be, do you pay or not pay? As you're thinking through those decisions. And the executives of your business need to be involved in that, right? And you'll hear that from your insurance company. You'll hear that from your attorneys. And so, as the CIO, I would make sure that we'd exercise our incident response plan often, but there was always a few times a year where we do the scenario where now are we going to pay or not pay, and it triggers all those conversations, and you find that your partners want to participate in that exercise. Your insurance company wants to participate in that exercise. Sometimes it's a requirement of your insurance coverage, but it's also very healthy to exercise that incident response at the business executive level.
Good stuff. Good stuff. So it depends on really what the business dictates, but like you said, you're involving those external partnerships, and the more frequently you kind of step through those scenarios, the better prepared you are. Remy, anything to add on that?
Sure. I think ransomware is so prevalent because it's so impactful to a lot of businesses that the choice is ultimately pay the ransom or let the business die. I can tell you with absolute certainty that your executive board, even if you're on the technical side, you have a recommendation. It really doesn't matter at that point. The executive board is going to save the business every time, even if that means paying the ransom, regardless of this idea that if no one paid it, it would just disappear overnight.
Eric, any comments there?
I think I've seen companies go through that very real world dilemma, because what's sitting in the back of your mind is always, am I really going to receive my data back, or am I dumping money down the drain, right? And that's another piece in the dilemma. I think, it's everyone to their own at that point, where, if you want to take the risk or not. Personally, I mean, my personal belief system is that rewarding ransomware will always be inefficient. But again, that's me saying this while not being breached. So I may speak differently tomorrow morning.
So I was talking with,
but I do have to say, Drew, but as a ransomware person, someone investing my time in trying to prevent ransomware, I think my answer to that would be, let's try to prevent ransomware in the first place, and then we don't have to be with our backs to the wall with that dilemma.
Yeah, that's an ounce of prevention up front, right? I was talking with someone this week, and we're talking about ransomware, paying the ransomware, and they had a ransomware incident and they paid, and then they were asked by the perpetrator if they would give them a good review. I'm like, give them a good review for what? And it was almost like Yelp for the dark web. Like, get hit by these guys. Did they give you the keys? Were they prompt? Like, blows my mind. Like, but this is a business, and so you perpetuate it if you do pay it, and you're encouraging that bad behavior, but you're also bolstering if you give them a good review, like, hey, these guys were mean to us, but they did what they said they were going to do. Crazy stuff, but it's out there.
Real quick, Drew, what that highlights though is they're savvy. They know the pain points. In other words, they know what they can get away with and not get away with. And they care about their reputation, because if they can't earn, they're out of business too. And so we were taught at my company by our attorneys and insurance company that the perpetrators know exactly what you do, how much you can afford, and what you're willing to pay so they can get away with it. And they want to fly under the radar. They do not want to be above the radar and visible. They want to be flying under the radar. And so sometimes they'll ask for a smaller amount just because they know they can get it. But that reputation is really critical to them.
Yeah, and one of the takeaways here, I mean, we've got in the audience, we have, some global enterprises all the way down to, local trucking companies. And the thing that I want to encourage everyone with is it doesn't matter the size of your organization, because just what you said there, Rob, is they know how much they can extract from you. And it's in the amount that seems like, what, gosh, we can afford this, we can do this, but it emboldens them to come back again. So that prevention up front is so critical, so that you don't get into that situation where not only get hit once, twice, three times before, what, maybe you just have to close up shop. So it's fascinating stuff, though.
Yeah, I think some cases the perception is these are, teenage hackers in sweatshirts, one person doing this hack, and that's really not the case. These are well organized organizations that are doing this and well funded, and they know what they're doing. So I think you have to be prepared for that.
Yeah. And that's their primary business. So let's agree that the inbound threats, they're well understood. Like, you guys are in the hot seat where you're taking arrows from all sides. And in the logistics business, organizations are constantly dealing with a different set of challenges in turnover. So I'm going to change this conversation a little bit. In an HR perspective, like, you've got, dock workers, and you've got, staffing for warehouse, or you've got, driver turnover. And there's a lot of resumes. There's a lot of information that HR constantly passes around. And don't think I'm just picking on HR if this is your area. But the document exchange internally is a ripe kind of a breeding ground for nefarious activity. So I want you guys to think about this. How much risk do you believe sits within shared documents across organizations? Like, and for everyone that's in the audience, I want you to think about Slack and Teams and your HR platform and Dropbox and different documents that already exist in your organization, and not you specifically, guys, but in organizations in general. How much of a ripe environment do you think is there for risk that already sits there? What do you think?
I think I can share what we've found lately. And, we talked about email earlier. Teams, for example, is such a great ground for hackers, right? Third-party facing applicant portals. If I want to hack into any company, I'd send a weaponized document, a resume through, an applicant portal. The HR person won't ask questions. They will open that file, and it will land, it will detonate, it will move laterally, and the breach will happen. So I think if we think about, one more example, we've had a very large bank customer of ours that actually was attacked through a third-party legal firm that they work with, which mistakenly used a weaponized template for all of their contracts. They didn't even know that it was a weaponized template, right? Now, every single one of their contracts, which is sent to their customers, is weaponized. So not even malicious, not intentional. These documents are shared internally through different platforms, through cloud storage. That data is dangerous and is everywhere. It's no longer, as you mentioned, a single attack vector through email. This is now everywhere.
Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a large issue. And why I'm chuckling a little bit is I think there's just so much decentralization of like IT procurement in general. It's so easy to go buy a new SaaS product or a new service on a credit card for, say, from a user's perspective, right? And then they upload a bunch of data to it and a bunch of files, right? And I think organizations have that all over the place, right? And so, I think logistics has really impacted just because we're so fast moving. We have many customers, many vendors. And I think you're trying to exchange data very quickly. So to me, it's ripe for this, easy to modify, move files around quite a bit. And you do see it quite a bit, in my opinion. The risk is really high.
And I guess, what you're looking at a different attack surface, and we think about what used to be is, it's the desktop, it's the endpoints, but now we've got these kind of tentacles into each of these different data repositories out there. How does IT get their hands around this, or how does cybersecurity get their hands around this thing? Remy, I'm gonna ask you for a minute here. Like, do you see this becoming a bigger challenge as you deliver security services for CR England? Is this popping up? Do you have your hands around this? What does it look like in your world?
Absolutely, it's a problem at CR England. It's a project we've been working on for over a year now to start cutting down where we're uploading these documents and what virus engines can we run through these documents. We need a way to have visibility into documents that are uploaded outside of email, because our email controls have gotten really strong. So they're always moving around. They're looking for a weak point, and I think you've absolutely identified what it is right now. It's a huge problem.
Yeah. So what I want to draw there for our audience is that, what we used to use as, safeguards for scanning emails and scanning documents and that kind of thing, that's no longer good enough. We have to look at all corners of the organization. What is HR doing? What is, what manufacturing doing? What is every corner of our business? Where are they storing documents? Because those are ripe areas for bad actors to penetrate. So great point there, guys. I want to look at cybersecurity frameworks a little bit, and I want to draw this out for you. So like a typical scenario, we establish risk. Like as cybersecurity leaders, we establish our risk strategy or a risk management strategy, and then we identify our critical systems, we put protections in place, and even so, we find out that there's an issue. In this case, like ransomware gets in, and we have to respond to that. We contain it, we take systems offline, and we begin the rollback process, Chris, like you mentioned, either from snapshots or data copies that live on immutable storage. We start rolling that back. And that, of course, is the NIST framework. So the National Institute of Standards and Technology, for those that aren't familiar, it provides a framework for delivering cybersecurity. And even with an army of IT folks internally, this is tough to execute against from all in-house resources, because everyone has a day job to do. And then you're called to, bring everyone together and drop everything, focus strictly on the recovery piece. And as you build a strategy and guard against, fraud and ransomware, how do you balance tasks? And this is the question for each of you guys that I want you to take a swing at here. How do you balance the tasks that you keep in-house versus those that you out-task? Now, I just made that word up, but like, you get it. Like, you're not going to outsource everything, but you out-task some of these things. How do you decide what stays in-house and what you out-task? Rob, I want to start with you. What do you think?
Yeah, it's actually very consistent with how I assess that for any function in IT. I think about, strategically we had parameters. So at a high level, we'd say, look, if things are operate, run, they don't require a lot of business domain knowledge, I'm probably going to source that. That was just our strategy, whether it was security or what have you. So that's the first starting point. The second starting point is there are things where technology is changing so rapidly that I can't possibly train internal people fast enough, and I need to rely on partners to stay up above and fast and beyond that. Third is I like to be in a position where if I need to change partners, I can change partners. And so those three kind of lenses would inform should I source something or not. And it wasn't perfect, and we weren't always consistent with that, but those were the guardrails that we would think through as we talked about the activities. Now, the other piece of this, though, is what activities do you need the business to do, business resources to do, that affect your strategy, that affect your capabilities. Like, I need business people to perform or start work on audits with us. That has to happen. That goes back to my roadmap, right? I have that partnership I can rely on. And I could call for that, right? But it from an IT perspective, I'd use that framework. from a business perspective, needing resources, I would use internal influence based on my relationships at the executive level, and say, look, and I wouldn't surprise me. Like, here's what we're going to need from you this year. Here's three events that are going to occur over this year. I'm going to need your people to help a little bit, and so you give them runway to prepare for it, and that way it's not a surprise. But internally for IT guardrails, externally for business influence.
Yeah, I want you to rewind the tape there a little bit. And you said that there's three things that you look at that way. Walk through those three just so to make sure our audience can get that again.
If I can remember them.
Yeah, right.
So the first thing is, does it require business knowledge, right?
Domain knowledge.
Domain knowledge, right? And I'd use that whether I'm talking about SAP resources or anything else, right? I use the same idea. Second is the rate at which technology is changing, how fast people have to come up to speed on things, right?
Yeah.
What was my third one I said? I'm trying to remember what I said. Maybe someone can remind me in the chat. But the idea is that this is not a fixed thing. It's just it is a guardrail. It's directional. It's a guiding principle for how you assess. Should we insource or outsource it? And I think the third thing was changing partners, right? The ability to
change your partners. You're right. You're right.
You never really want to do it, but sometimes you have to. And then sometimes those companies walk away from you as well. They change the trajectory of what they're doing, or they get bought or sold. So you have to be prepared for their change as well.
Good stuff. That's great. I appreciate you commenting on that. Anyone else have any ideas or thoughts that they want to pile on there?
I think, I can just add, I think, Rob, the last point or one of the points you mentioned was on how quickly you can actually change third parties or contractors when needed. Same here, right? Building cybersecurity products. If I outsource something, I want to know that I can change quickly. I want to know that the core knowledge that will build on our business success, that remains internal, and everything else can be super flexible. So I'm with you on that.
Yeah, so I want to just comment on one nuance, right, that I think is really, really important. And I think I might be a little critical of my partner CIOs. Sometimes we're punitive, right? And we switch because of cost, or we switch because of service level. My outlook is very different. My outlook was, I never want to get to that place. I never want to have to pull the contract out and say, look what you didn't do. So that means I have to have an ongoing business relationship management process. And I mean me as the CIO with our partners, where if we have problems coming, we can sit down and fix them because we're so close and we rely on each other so much. It never has to get punitive. And I think when it gets to that level, that's a whole different level of operating. If you're working in a punitive space, you're never going to get ahead. And so I think nurturing your partnerships is so critical to the CIO role nowadays that sometimes we lose sight of that because we just, I'll just switch. Well, it's not that easy, honestly. It's hard. So relationship management's a big piece of it. Anyway, that's enough of my commercial.
No, that's good stuff. And I want to ask, is the follow-up question there is, how do you objectively evaluate and select, in this case, security partners, but like you've got so much on your plate. How do you objectively evaluate and then select partners? How do you go about that?
Me? Okay.
Is this open for anyone? Like,
yeah, I don't want to hog, so I'll let somebody else. I'll follow up.
You know what? I'll take a swing at this one. I think it. Obviously there's obviously many different facets to that, right? I think it could be anything. Hey, is it cost, service level? What's your SLA? I think it's, sometimes I think it's flexibility and what kind of customer service can be provided, right? So I think it's generally a combination, but it also depends on what it is too, right? Like say you're trying to outsource a help desk, for instance, obviously you want much better customer service. Maybe you're willing to pay a little bit more for that customer service for end users. If it's more of a commodity item, maybe you don't care as much about the customer service, right? So maybe cost is more of a factor. I think it really just depends on those factors and what you're trying to, what the partner's trying to do and what you're trying to outsource potentially or, partner with.
I'll just, my 2 cents, negotiating contracts, where this partnership's going to go as you're getting into contracts, right? The kind of relationship it's going to be. And so if it starts to smell bad, it's probably going to be bad. I think secondly, if they're culture, I think their culture matters. And if your partner's culture is not good, that's also a barometer of, just something you'd be to pay attention to. And I think third, reputation. Now, if I ask them for references, they're going to give me the good ones, clearly, right? Just as I would, right? But I think you need to seek third-party validation on that, just reputation. Not always easy, sometimes expensive, but I think that's really important. And then the last thing is I always ask the question, tell me about a relationship that went bad, a deal that wasn't done the right way, and tell me how it got back on track. Or if it didn't. I want to hear them talk through it. I don't want to hear them say it was all good. I want to hear them talk about the factors they were considering and the approaches they were taking to collectively problem solve and get to a good spot. So I want to hear a little bit more about their process for dealing with difficult situations.
Good stuff. And I want to share this with you guys and also the audience. Like this is exactly where C3 can be a partner for you guys. Is like we don't have the services ourselves, so we work alongside leadership to understand that and help you through that decision-making process. So that's my 2 cents on that. Is you need to have a third party. Rob, you said it yourself, someone to help you objectively evaluate that. And that's really what we do in this whole thing. I want to change a little bit to your experience. The folks that are in our audience, they want to hear from you and your experience. And so one specifically, Rob, your previous role as CIO with a multi-billion-dollar organization that was created from M&A. There's a lot of M&A in the freight and logistics world, so I think this is going to speak to them. Tell me about managing risk through M&A, because you had to walk through this. How do you de-risk, mergers and acquisitions?
You treat everybody as an outside player, first of all. There's no other approach. You might like each other, the whole thing, but you just have to treat them as an external player, and you have to connect them into you as you would a third party, with the same level of risk, same level of concern, and until they are on your network and using the same capabilities you have, and they're following the same protocols you're following, they're essentially a rogue state. It just has to be. That's how we did it, right? And typically, when we would buy a company, part of the due diligence was cyber. You start to learn more about what they do, how they do it, and it's not just their technical capability. It's what was the last audit report like? What's their penetration testing like? What is their employee education like? What's their insurance coverage like? When was the last time, all those things, things that are cultural, that are structural. And that starts to inform how fast you have to go to integrate from a technology perspective. But we were very skeptical, and we would not connect without serious firewalls in place or capabilities in place. Treat them as an external player, bottom line.
Got it. And Eric, I'm going to come back to you on this one, but I want to look at the global scale. So Rob, appreciate that, the M&A, there's a lot of that in this space, so that's helpful. Chris, you've got scale, with Sequel Logistics being a 3PL across the globe, literally like in, 160 locations in like 60 countries, I think. Your attack surface is massive. And so how do you scale? Talk to me about managing risk at scale.
Sure. First of all, it's challenging. I'm not going to sugarcoat that, but I think the second thing is you have to establish relationships. I think Rob mentioned it earlier in the conversation, but you have to establish relationships with, obviously these different countries, continents, regions, right? And, work with them, not just dictate what you want to do, right? Hey, say you have an endpoint detection response tool you want to roll out, right? It's getting their input as well. But basically, you need to scale yourself by leveraging them and starting that collaboration with teammates and team members to basically roll out and deploy new software technologies and processes across, globally, basically. And I think really just having those relationships in place, that's key, because if you don't have those, we can say whatever we want to do. Are they going to really do it and get it done in the time that's needed, right? And so to me, that's the starting point. Without that, nothing really goes, and you don't see what I would say good progress there. So I think that's the number one.
So you've got rather than a tactical approach, you're talking about, building relationship capital in the organization, in these different places that you exist, so that you can bring your plan forward and say, hey, you know what, here's what we're doing, but you're locking arms with those folks and they're on the same team. So that's sage advice. That's good stuff. We're going to jump over to Eric. Eric, you come to the market with an incredible technology. Votiro does anyway. And want to land in this is that you can immediately de-risk acquisitions, and you can provide key pillars for building a security program, but then also scale globally almost instantly. And so I want you to talk about the technology briefly, and then if you can, in the space that we've got, talk about one of the world's largest maritime shipping companies who was a routine target for fraud and ransomware, and now you're helping them to be, I'll say, nearly bulletproof.
So I think, many of the points we talked about today are kind of coming full circle here, because we're talking about the balance between security and usability, and we're talking about entry points, and data is everywhere, and it's no longer just email. And what Votiro does is we call ourselves the zero trust content security company. What does that mean? It means that we know that files are everywhere in cloud storage, in portals, in collaboration tools, in email, and the files are everywhere, and they are the main vehicle for delivering ransomware and malware. So what we do is we ensure that all files being delivered are as close as possible to 100% safe. We never say 100% in the cyberspace, but it is as close as possible to 100%. Votiro does not need to detect known bad. For example, we don't detect known malicious signatures or known bad behaviors. We sanitize files in a way that basically leaves them totally safe to use through a technology called content disarm and reconstruction. Now, what is important is that we can do that across anywhere where files exist, across collaboration tools and email and cloud storage and portals, third-party facing portals. So if we go back to the example of M&A, when you buy a company, you've acquired a company, now there's a bunch of information that needs to be potentially combined, right? You have two OneDrives, now let's combine OneDrives. Now, while it's important to securely bring the new company into your network, a second aspect is they have a lot of information that is going to be pushed into your potentially cloud storage or SharePoint. How do you ensure that 2 years ago, or 4 years ago, or 6 years ago, they had enough protection and tools in place to ensure that data is actually safe? What we do is we allow, during that transfer, to cleanse those files so they are 100% safe to be used. And because of that, if we take, for example, one of the largest shipping companies in the world, they've been, as you mentioned, a massive target for attackers. They came to us being hit with many ransomware attempts. And I think a few very interesting use cases to look at obviously email was a big one. But a second one was the enormous amount of documents being shared by ships sailing the seas when they dock at different ports and offloading all of that important information regarding whatever it is that they are carrying, right? And that was actually an attack vector and an entry point for additional malware. So every one of these points where data is exchanged, ships to dock, back to the backend, email traffic, information coming in from SaaS applications into email, all of those were secured to ensure that ransomware doesn't have an entry point into the organization. And we're seeing great success there.
That's good stuff. I appreciate you sharing that. And I know that's one of the neatest stories, because those big companies, they get hit from just relentlessly, and the mergers and acquisitions, being able to go through and sanitize documents wherever they live is really important. So I'm really bullish on what you guys are doing. So keep up the great work there. We do have a question that came in the chat here, and I want to see if we can get Mike an answer on this. Where do you guys believe, where do you see most logistics companies' maturity when it comes to having third-party risk programs in place? So let's see here. Where do you see most logistics companies' maturity when it comes to having third-party risk assessment programs in place. So third-party risk assessment companies come in, and do we see, where are they at in terms of maturity? I can tell you anecdotally, companies that I work with, they are laggards in freight and logistics in general are security laggards, technology laggards as well, kind of sweat those assets for a long period of time. And that's just, my gallery view of it.
I think, Drew, one of the things we've been seeing is that one of the unique challenges that freight logistics company deals with is that these companies are not a clean, high-tech company with 5,000 MacBooks and 20,000 Windows devices, and you can manage them and it's all good, right? You have ships, you have trucks, you have it is very, very hard. And these ships and trucks and airplanes have computers on them that deal with the specifics of logistics. And sometimes these are embedded systems. That is super tricky to secure. And what's, I think, one of the, beyond securing the ship itself and its systems, when that information is funneled back to the back end, how do you secure that? So that's, again, the point where you need to come in, and as traffic is traversing, as data is moving, that's where we need to be securing it in real time. So unique challenge.
I'll just echo Eric's point about the IT versus OT, right? So most companies, IT is much more mature, much further ahead than actually the OT, right? And so whether it's the devices in the facilities, devices on board trucks, the devices that are at the edge, boy, oh boy, sometimes that's just, I don't want to say it's an afterthought, but I guarantee you those are behind where the IT capability is. So as you ask a company about their maturity or about their capabilities, they are always going to reference their IT, not their OT. And so I think that's a good way to differentiate it, right? I think you have to pressure test both.
That's a really good point. And I think sometimes we forget about the OT side of the house. We've got 3 minutes left here, and guys, this has been a great discussion. And when I invited you into this, I really wanted to showcase kind of your experience and bring together a good dialogue to help our audience as they think about, how do I put together a strategy? How do I approach this with the threat landscape that is today, and not with what I used to know? So I hope that this is hitting the mark for folks. I want to thank you guys for coming on here and participating in this thing and sharing your experience with the audience. And so I'd like to ask each of you if you have a closing thought or kind of a nugget of wisdom that you would like to impart to our listeners as they think about their strategy, or they, what bolster their cyber resiliency. So Chris, any closing thoughts or words of wisdom?
Yeah, I would just say, start, we talked a little bit about zero trust a little bit. I think you're going to see a lot more of that, obviously, and more vendors talking about it. But, it's principles, it's guidance, it's design, it's architecture. It's not a product necessarily or a single service. And I think everyone needs to start thinking about how to get to more zero trust design principles in their organization over the next coming years.
Good stuff. So just encouraging folks to get on that zero trust journey. Great. Remy, any closing thoughts, words of wisdom?
Absolutely. Today we've talked a lot about the controls and had a lot of our discussion specific to the controls and the risk. But I think it's always important to mention when you're talking about cybersecurity program, control is only half the battle. A good cybersecurity program comes in when control meets policy and they work together. Always remember, if you're implementing a new tool, you need a policy in place. If you're setting up phishing training and simulation for your users, you need a policy in place. Your users actually do the training, and the users actually are willing to not go up in arms with pitchforks when they click on a phish test and they go to the CIO's office like, what was that?
And that does happen.
Policy is critical. It does happen. It's happened to me.
For sure.
Yeah. Not making friends that way, right? Rob, any closing thoughts, words of wisdom?
Yeah, this is going to sound like a CIO who's not allowed to touch the technology, right? But I will tell you, somebody gave me a book once, and the book is summarized in a TED Talk that you can spend 8 minutes watching. And it's a guy named Simon Sinek, and it's the TED Talk's called "Start with Why."
Yeah.
It is transformational in how you think about IT investment. And I encourage everyone to spend the 8 minutes go watch it. It's just a very unique way to put a lens on and motivate IT investment the right way. And so that's what I would leave you with, is go watch it. It looks interesting. It's 8 minutes. It might change some things for you.
Good stuff. Eric, we got about 30 seconds left, and then we're going to wrap here. Final words yours.
Okay, I think my view into this is the following. We've built so many cybersecurity products that give you visibility into the problem. We've been seeing so many technologies out there that show you the problem. Showing the problem is one thing. Challenges, we've been seeing way too much alerts, notifications. We're bombed every day with 1,000 problems that these tools are showing us. Choose technologies that solve the problem for you instead of tell you how many problems we actually may have.
Great. Thanks for that. So we are at the top of the hour. I'm committed to ending on time, so we're there. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being on the panel. I've enjoyed the conversation, and I'm enjoyed having you guys weigh in on different questions. And to our audience, thank you. We hope this is edifying in some way and helps you on your never-ending task to fight against fraud and ransomware. So with that, we're 1 minute after, and we are complete. Gentlemen, thank you very much for being here, and we'll see you next time. So long.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.